Good evening, everyone. I hope you can hear me clearly. Thank you very much for coming today and joining this, either at London Buddhist Vihara or online. This is a regular series of talks that we organize on the second Saturday of every month by the British MahaBodhi Society. We're at London Buddhist Vihara right now. We've got an excellent speaker lined up for you this evening, and I'd like to now welcome the head monk of London Buddhist Vihara, Most Venerable Venerable Seeladassana, to give the welcome address, please.
Good evening, everyone. You all are welcome to this monthly Dhamma talk. I would like to introduce our speaker today, Venerable Seeladassana. We are delighted to welcome Venerable Seeladassana to speak to us today about happiness and Buddhism for the British MahaBodhi Society. A warm welcome to you all from London Buddhist Vihara, to all those who have joined us today, either here in Chiswick or wherever you are in the world. Our speaker today, Venerable Seeladassana, was born as Praveen Jayasinghe in Sri Lanka and was educated in Colombo. He then immigrated to the USA, where he graduated in mathematics at Dartmouth College and enjoyed a successful career in investment banking in New York and San Francisco. In his 30s, he decided to become a Buddhist monk and returned to Sri Lanka, where he ordained in 2011. He undertook further study of the Buddha's Vinaya, doctrine and discipline, and spent 6 years in intense meditation practice in Myanmar. Today, Venerable Seeladassana leads the Sihanada International Meditation Community in Sri Lanka, teaches meditation according to the Visuddhimagga tradition. Venerable Seeladassana will offer his discourse on a very important topic that is relevant to us all: how to achieve happiness through Buddhism. We would like to invite him today.
Thank you. First of all, I want to pay respect to Venerable Venerable Seeladassana, Chief Sanghanayaka of Britain and the host abbot of London Buddhist Vihara. Venerable Sir, thank you for your kind introduction. I ask you and the Sangha permission to speak on the Dhamma today. Secondly, I want to thank Mr. Amal Abeyawardena, the MahaBodhi Society of Britain and the London Buddhist Vihara for inviting me to spend this evening with you. Good evening to everyone from London, and a warm hello to everyone else joining us from other parts of the world. Buddhism and happiness. I think we can all agree that happiness plays an important role in our lives. We work for it, we strive for it. We spend days, months, and years planning for it. Friendships, education, employment, food, music, relationships. They all revolve around our version or opinion of what happiness is. At a macro level, it's quite obvious we spend our lives pursuing happiness. But even at a subtle level, the mind looks for happiness, darts around, searching for objects to entertain itself. If you could just close your eyes for a few seconds and observe your mind right now, you might begin to see it move around while you're listening to me. If you think what I'm saying is interesting, you might begin to think, oh, what is the Bhante going to say next? If you find me boring, you might begin to think, when will he stop? So I can go back home, prepare supper and watch TV. If you find me very interesting, you might begin to think, I'll introduce him to my friends. The mind continues to look for happiness. But this is only one side of the coin. There's another side. If you pay attention to your body, sometimes you might notice it move backwards and forwards. Move your neck left or right. Cross and uncross your arms or legs. Why? Well, the mind notices the slight niggles of pain, the stress, and wants to relieve that pain, so it adapts a new posture. So from one side, the mind searches for happiness, and from another side, it continuously runs away from suffering. This search for happiness and running away from suffering continues throughout our lives. The Buddha taught us about happiness. He gave us a lot of information. He understood that objects are a primary cause for happiness. We have visible objects, sound objects, smell, taste, touch, and mental objects. Let's take an example. You watch your little child playing in the snow. That could bring you happiness. The sound of sweet music or the taste of delicious food. All of these things could bring you happiness. But the Buddha did not stop at only objects for happiness. He also taught us about the internal workings of the mind, how the mind perceives these objects, how it reacts to it. He also taught us how to develop the mind so we can perceive them in a way that can maintain our happiness. That same child who was playing in the snow, if he doesn't stop playing and he continues to play for hours, he'll begin to annoy you or worry you. When is he going to stop playing and start doing his homework? Or will he get sick? That same beautiful sound, if it continues to play nonstop, will start irritating your ear. And you'll ask someone to please reduce the volume. And that delicious food, if you consume too much, it begins to bring discomfort to your stomach. So while the objects haven't changed that much, the way the mind perceives these objects did change. Today, we're going to spend some time learning about the internal workings of the mind. What I want to do is to study some defining points in understanding happiness and then connect these to happiness, understand how they relate. Then I want us to be able to hopefully use this information, integrate it into our lives, and improve types of happiness we experience on a daily basis. We will focus on feeling, wise attention, unwise attention, wholesome thoughts, unwholesome thoughts, virtue, meditation with respect to concentration, and meditation with respect to insight. I think most of you are probably very, very familiar with these topics. But today I want to spend some time diving into them, learning a little bit about what constitutes them, and then what are the causes for them, so that we can relate them to happiness much more easily. Let's first of all take feeling. Please remember, the mind never arises alone. It always arises with a bunch of mental factors. One of them is feeling. This has the characteristic of experiencing an object. The Buddha taught many types of feelings. We have somanassa feeling, which is pleasant feeling. This feeling can arise with wholesome thoughts or unwholesome thoughts associated with greed. From the unwholesome thought side, we have three types of thoughts: greed-rooted, delusion-rooted, and anger-rooted. So this pleasant feeling can only arise with greed-rooted thoughts. It cannot arise with delusion-rooted or anger-rooted thoughts. Next, we have sukha. This is bliss. Actually, this is the bliss that can be obtained from meditative development. If a person reaches the first jhana, second jhana, or third jhana, they have a very high level of happiness. This happiness is what is referred to as sukha. Actually, the bliss in the third jhana is referred to as the highest bliss that can be obtained in the mundane world. Next, we have another type of sukha that arises with body consciousness. Here, if we touch a pleasant object, then we have a pleasant feeling. This pleasant feeling is what is referred to as sukha. We also have upekkha, equanimity. This type of feeling can arise with wholesome thoughts, unwholesome thoughts associated with greed, and then unwholesome thoughts rooted in delusion. Again, please remember, this cannot rise with anger-rooted thoughts. It's important to understand this when we try to understand what stress is or sadness. We also have another type of upekkha, which is equanimity associated with the fourth jhana, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth jhanas. This is a very high level of equanimity associated with a very high level of peace. Then we have domanassa, a very important type of feeling, grief. Sometimes we call it grief, sometimes we call it sadness. Some might refer to it as lamentation. This only arises with minds that have anger, anger-rooted consciousness. So whenever we feel stress or sad, then it's this type of domanassa feeling that's actually arising in our mind. Finally, we have dukkha feeling. It's the pain that arises with body consciousness. Here, when our body is, for example, pierced with an injection or we fall and hurt ourselves, that painful feeling, that's dukkha vedana. Next, let's discuss wise attention. Wise attention is actually quite important because it acts as one of the primary conditions for wholesome thoughts. In my experiences as a meditation teacher, I found out that sometimes people mistake or misunderstand wise attention, mindfulness, and awareness. These are three different things, and I want to bring some clarity to the differences. Mindfulness is actually a mental factor called sati. It arises in wholesome minds. It arises only in wholesome minds. Wise attention, on the other hand, is a cause for wholesome minds to arise. To understand wise attention, let's take an example of a cognitive process. Here we have the mind door process. When a person lives their life, there's a thought that continuously runs through them. It's called bhavanga, or life continuum. It's a very, very subtle thought. Actually, when you're in very deep sleep, it's the bhavanga mind that arises and perishes. However, when the mind takes an object, this life continuum is interrupted. And what we call a mind door adverting consciousness actually arises. This mind door adverting consciousness takes the new object. It has 12 mental factors. One of them is adhimukha, also known as decision. If the person makes the wise decision, or if a wise decision arises here, then we call this wise attention. And wholesome minds only follow. Unwholesome minds cannot follow. So wise attention is actually a type of decision-making process that can give rise to wholesome thoughts. Mindfulness is actually sati, mental factor, that arises in wholesome thoughts. Then how about awareness? It's very important to understand awareness. Awareness can actually be wholesome or unwholesome. Let me give you an example. Let's say a thief decides to steal your jewelry. So he walks into your house very well aware of his surroundings, very well aware of his behavior. He opens the doors quietly, he treads softly, he makes sure not to leave any fingerprints. He opens the safe very carefully, takes the jewelry, puts it in his bag, and exits, all with a very high level of awareness. However, this awareness did not have any wholesome thoughts. All the thoughts were actually unwholesome, and it definitely did not have any wise attention. So please understand, awareness is one thing, mindfulness is one thing, wise attention is another. Then let's move on to unwise attention. Unwise attention actually plays a similar role as wise attention when you look at the cognitive process, except, of course, the decision is unwise. If there is unwise decision or unwise attention, then only unwholesome thoughts can arise. So this is important to understand. When we have thoughts of anger or stress, that means that one of the primary conditions for that is unwise attention. Next, I want to talk about wholesome thoughts. The Buddha taught many types of wholesome thoughts. Here, what I want to focus on is the constituents. Actually, what makes up these wholesome thoughts? What are the special features of these wholesome thoughts? Here, we have some of the mental factors associated with these wholesome thoughts. These mental factors actually only arise in wholesome thoughts. They cannot arise in unwholesome thoughts. We have faith, mindfulness, shame to do wrong, fear to do wrong, non-greed, non-anger, tranquility of the mind, and tranquility of the mental body. Here, the mental body refers to the mental factors that actually arise with the mind. So we have tranquility of the mind and tranquility of the mental body. Lightness of the mind, lightness of the mental body. Malleability of the mind, malleability of the mental body. Wieldiness of the mind, wieldiness of the mental body. Proficiency of the mind, proficiency of the mental body. Rectitude of the mind, rectitude of the mental body. Specific neutrality, and sometimes wisdom. These mental factors are very, very powerful. They make the mind calm, make it light, malleable. Here, please understand, it's not that the person is malleable, it's that the mind is malleable. The meditator or the person who has a malleable mind can do many things using that mind. And the mind is wieldy. So what do these mental factors do? They actually strengthen the mind, make it very, very powerful. And they only arise in wholesome minds. Then let us consider unwholesome thoughts. Here I want to focus on greed-rooted unwholesome thoughts and anger-rooted unwholesome thoughts. In greed-rooted unwholesome thoughts, we have greed, delusion, restlessness, shamelessness in doing wrong, fearlessness in doing wrong, wrong view, conceit. If there's wrong view, conceit does not arise. If there is conceit, wrong view does not arise. They don't arise together. Sometimes we can have sloth and torpor, depending on how the mind arises. In an anger-rooted, unwholesome thought, we will have anger, again, delusion, restlessness, shamelessness in doing wrong, fearlessness in doing wrong. Sometimes there will be jealousy, sometimes avarice, remorse. And depending on how the mind arises, maybe sloth and torpor. Again, these mental factors only arise in unwholesome minds. They cannot arise in wholesome minds. Next, we have virtue. Virtue plays an integral role, a very important role in the Dhamma. The Buddha taught many types of virtue: 5 precepts, 8 precepts, 10 precepts, high ordination bhikkhu virtue, high ordination bhikkhuni virtue. Today, we're going to focus on the 5 precepts. I think we're all probably very familiar with it, but we have abstaining from killing, abstaining from stealing, abstaining from engaging in sexual misconduct, abstaining from lying, and abstaining from consuming intoxicants. Now, I found out that in society, sometimes people think or wonder that these rules, these precepts are very constraining. They constrain the mind. They don't make the mind free and liberated. We can't do whatever we want. Actually, these precepts very much help liberate the mind, very much help make it free. Let's take a simple example to understand. Let's say there's a person called John. So John decides to lie to his friend. Now, after he finishes lying, what happens is, at a very subtle level, thoughts begin to arise in his mind to make sure his lie is not caught, to make sure his friend or others don't find out that he lied. What does this mean? Sometimes John avoids his friends. Sometimes he won't go to his favorite restaurant because if he goes there, people will find out that he lied. So what happens is actually John is not free anymore. He's trapped in his lie. And this happens at a very subtle level. And he can control our lives to a great deal. And I mean, if we take a very serious example of breaking the precepts, like if someone kills someone or steals something, they could actually end up in jail. So not only is his mind constrained, he's also physically constrained. So the precepts actually help protect the person's mind and help it actually become free. So it's important to remember this. And then we have concentration meditation, samadhi. The Buddha taught 40 meditation subjects that we can use to develop concentration. And then there are 2 levels of concentration discussed in the Dhamma. One is absorption concentration and one is access concentration. Absorption concentration is actually what we sometimes refer to as jhana concentration. It's a very high level of concentration. Here, I think we have the 10 kasinas, anapanasati, which we're all quite familiar with. Then we have loving kindness, compassion, altruistic joy, equanimity, body, mindfulness of the body, 32 body parts, the 10 foulness meditations, and the 4 immaterial jhanas. So altogether, we have 30 meditation subjects in which we can achieve absorption concentration. Access concentration is what we call in the neighborhood of absorption concentration. It's near absorption concentration, but it's not absorption concentration. Also, the momentary concentration we have when we do vipassana or insight meditation, this also is referred to as access concentration. Now, again, here, in my experiences, I found out that sometimes people misunderstand concentration. We have to remember the Buddha taught right concentration, samma samadhi. So does that mean that there's something called wrong concentration? Well, actually there is. To understand, let's take an example. Let's say there's a rifleman and he goes to the shooting range to practice his shooting. At that point, he's very well focused on the target. He knows where his finger is on the trigger. The rifle is resting quite nicely on his shoulder. Someone might say he's very well concentrated. However, this type of concentration is not what we call right concentration. Here, the thoughts that arise in his mind are unwholesome. In the Dhamma, wrong concentration is described as we have a mental factor called vitakka, or initial application. What it does is it keeps the mind on one object. Vitakka and the other mental factors that arise in that mind prevent the mind going towards another object. So what ends up happening is it appears that the person has concentration. It appears he has one-pointedness. However, this is not what we call right concentration. In right concentration, there is no stress. There's no need to force the mind onto an object. Once the mental factors, the dhammas associated with concentration become stronger and stronger, the mind automatically stays in that object, immersed in the object. And it's quite peaceful and tranquil. There's no stress, there's no force. Next, we have vipassana, or insight meditation. Vipassana is the discernment of ultimate reality in several ways. I mean, it's very deep and very vast. And we're not going to go into how to do vipassana. What we are going to do is try to understand some of the effects of vipassana. One of the primary effects is that 4 noble truths become clearer and clearer when a person progresses through vipassana. Here, the 4 noble truths are the noble truth of suffering, the noble truth of the origin of suffering, the noble truth of the cessation of suffering, and the noble truth of the path leading to the cessation of suffering. How does it become clear? Well, what happens is actually the 5 aggregates of clinging become clear. Dependent origination, which matches with the second noble truth, becomes clear. While the person may have not attained Nibbana, his understanding of the 5 aggregates, cause effect, makes his understanding of Nibbana clearer and clearer. And of course, the path to Nibbana becomes clearer and clearer. Then, vipassana also helps increase wisdom. Insight meditation helps increase mindfulness. It reduces stress, greed, and other unwholesome thoughts. Actually, the defilements are suppressed by what we call substitution of opposites. Here, the wisdom and other mental factors that arise because of the development of vipassana suppress the defilements. Here, suppress does not mean that we have defilements and they're kind of pushed down. No, what it means is that defilements don't arise in this person's mind. The wisdom and other mental factors don't allow it to arise. Also, finally, the respective defilements are eradicated by the respective patchittas. Sotapanna patchitta, Sakadagami patchitta, Anagami patchitta, Malaha patchitta. the respective defilements and eradicate. So now we've studied a little bit about these defining factors of happiness. Now what I want to do is connect them with happiness, relate them to happiness, sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly. Of course, out of this, feeling is the easy one. Pleasant feeling is usually what we recognize as happiness. Pleasant feeling is what we sometimes think, now I'm very happy. Then we have minds of high concentration, which have equanimity, such as the fourth jhana. Here, the equanimity is associated with a high level of peace. Because this peace and this equanimity is very high, it's very pleasant to the person, even though there is no pleasant feeling. So this type of concentration is also referred to as type of happiness. And sometimes when a person is not sad, absence of grief, this too is a type of happiness. Absence of suffering is a type of happiness. So now we have to talk about 3. And then we have wholesome thoughts that have pleasant feeling. Here, the wholesome thoughts that have pleasant feeling have very, very strong mental factors that arise with them. So the pleasant feeling that arises here is very, very strong, supported by these mental factors of tranquility, malleability, lightness, so on and so forth. Then how about unwholesome thoughts that have pleasant feeling? Yes, unwholesome thoughts actually do have pleasant feeling, the greed-rooted unwholesome thoughts. Here, however, because of the mental factors that arise with it, it's not as strong or refined or blissful as the type of feeling that arises with wholesome thoughts. Next, let's connect wise attention with happiness. Wise attention is an important condition that assists in developing higher and higher levels of happiness. Actually, if you consider the 4 factors of stream entry, the 4 factors of Sotapanna Magga, they are listening to the good Dhamma, associating wise persons, having wise attention, and practicing according to the Dhamma. So wise attention is essential for the realization of Nibbana, the highest level of peace or bliss. Then wise attention is also necessary to discern ultimate reality, to discern the 5 aggregates, to discern cause-effect, to discern impermanence, suffering, and non-self. So again, wise attention is very important. Wise attention is also important to achieve concentration. If without wise attention, cannot reach high levels of samadhi, high levels of concentration. Then wise attention also arises when we have wholesome thoughts in our daily lives. All these wholesome thoughts need wise attention as a cause for them to rise. Example, when we're offering food to a venerable monk, that time we understand that there's good karma, we understand that we're doing a good deed, and there's a lot of wise attention. So these wholesome thoughts of patience and offering, we all have wise attention involved with them. When a person develops wise attention, wholesome thoughts arise. And as we learned earlier, wholesome thoughts can only have pleasant feeling or equanimity feeling. They cannot have grief. So when a person has wise attention, his stress levels reduce, his anger reduces. It's prevented by the wise attention. Wise attention also helps increase mindfulness and wisdom. Mindfulness and wisdom actually help protect the mind, help make it stronger, prevent it from deteriorating. For example, it promotes wholesome thoughts and it prevents unwholesome thoughts from arising. Finally, wise attention is a cause for wise attention. If you remember the example I showed you earlier, wise attention only lasts one moment. How does it happen? What happens is a person practices wise attention for long periods of time, and then these act as a cause for future wise attention to arise. Then how about unwise attention? How do we connect this to happiness? Well, unwise attention eventually leads to painful results and birth in woeful destinations. Unwise attention can lead to pleasure and greed-associated thoughts. However, remember, this pleasure is weaker and it's not as strong because of the unwholesome mental factors that arise. Also, unwise attention can lead to stress or grief. It's a primary condition for anger-associated thoughts to arise. Finally, unwise attention can lead to unwise attention, which means it can lead to increased levels of craving and increased levels of anger, which is not healthy, as we can all understand. Wholesome thoughts. Wholesome thoughts can only have feelings of pleasure or equanimity. So again, a direct connection with happiness. And as I mentioned earlier, wholesome thoughts have powerful mental factors that support this pleasant feeling and helps result in higher and higher levels of happiness. Wholesome thoughts also have wholesome results, kamma vipaka. So there are only wholesome results which can, of course, give us more happiness. Wholesome actions can be remembered often and can give us, again, more happiness. For example, if you helped a friend in need, or if you looked after someone even a decade ago, sometimes when we remember these events, it gives us happiness. So wholesome thoughts can act as a cause for more happiness. Wholesome thoughts result in association of wise persons. The person who has wholesome thoughts begin to incline to interact with wise people who practice the Dhamma. Of course, people praise people who behave or have wholesome behavior. People trust them more. And a person who engages in wholesome activity, he's fearless because he has nothing to hide. And finally, wholesome thoughts incline the mind to meditation, inclines it to escape samsara, or it can. Example, in Sri Lanka, we have many ceremonies where we do offerings to the Buddha. We have many offerings to the Sangha. These are wonderful, wholesome activities where many of us aspire for Nibbana. So what does happen? What happens is that this type of aspiration leads to the person to meditate in future lives. Why? Because meditation is necessary for the attainment of Nibbana. So then they meditate and they can maybe one day escape samsara. So wholesome thoughts are very, very important in the practice of the Dhamma. Unwholesome thoughts. Well, pleasant feeling arises as a greed, associated and unwholesome thoughts. We know that. We have this type of pleasant feeling often in our lives. However, it's not as blissful and it's more gross than the pleasant thoughts, pleasant feelings that arise in wholesome thoughts. Why? As I explained earlier, the mental factors are more detrimental to the mind. Then the result of unwholesome thoughts are unpleasant results. So even though we have unwholesome thoughts and we might have some pleasure now, results later will be unpleasant. It can also be the cause of future stress. It can lead to increased craving. Sometimes we engage in dangerous activities to satisfy our craving. Sometimes we can have remorse. Bondage to samsara increases. Increased unwise attention, and of course they're blameworthy. So unwholesome thoughts are very dangerous. As we're going through this, you might begin to understand that each of these factors are kind of connected to each other. This is one of the beautiful factors of the Dhamma. Each of them is actually interconnected. And once we begin to understand one, we can begin to understand the other. And things become clearer and clearer. So it's one of the lovelier, wonderful aspects. Of course, the Dhamma as a whole is wonderful, but I personally enjoyed this part a lot. Then we talk about Sila. Practicing virtue will help increase wise attention. Of course, when we're going to kill an animal and we think, oh, I've taken the 5 precepts, I'm not going to kill the animal. Then we have wise attention. Practicing virtue will increase wholesome thoughts. Also, a person who practices virtue, this virtue strengthens his good deeds. So if he engages in offerings of dana or generosity, engages in patience, emphasizes and makes these deeds much, much stronger. It leads to birth in good destinations, which of course can result in happiness. It's a necessary base for developing concentration and insight to realizing Nibbana. Without virtue, you cannot realize Nibbana. And of course, it's praised by the wise, and the person who practices virtue does not have remorse, he's not blamed by others, so on and so forth. How about concentration then? Concentration, practicing concentration can give immediate results of high bliss. The person who reaches access concentration or absorption concentration, very, very powerful, pleasant feelings, or sukha rather, arises in the mind, bliss, okay, with absorption concentration. Then, of course, practicing high concentration will suppress greed, anger, and delusion. It'll improve also the way sometimes people address stressful situations. I found out that some of my students who follow the lay life, they say that they are more patient and they can react differently to stressful situations after practicing meditation. Of course, concentration increases wise attention and wisdom. There's increased peace in non-meditative periods. Person practices concentration, and after that, he might not be practicing meditation, but still that level of peace can continue throughout a large portion of his day. Of course, concentration can also result in rebirth in the pleasant realms, the Brahma or Deva realms. And then we have insight meditation. Practicing insight will result in the highest bliss, Nibbana. However, even the practice of Vipassana, the practice of insight, has many, many levels of happiness, many, many higher levels of happiness. First of all, let's understand some of the stages of purification involved in insight meditation. We have purification of view, purification by removal of doubt, purification by knowledge and vision of what is and what is not the way, purification by knowledge and vision of the way, and then purification by knowledge and vision. The last one actually incorporates the four respective pachittas in the first four stages of the development towards the stage. At each of these stages, different defilements are actually suppressed. And because of this, and of course, the increased wisdom and the increased strength of the mental factors, the wholesome mental factors, the mind can experience, again, higher and higher levels of happiness. With respect to the suppressing defilements, an example would be that the 20 wrong views are suppressed when a person attains purification of view. And if he attains purification by removal of doubt, then 62 wrong views are suppressed, 62 wrong views and doubt. And of course, as the person progresses and the wisdom increases, more and more defilements are suppressed. If a person attains Nibbana, realizes Nibbana, then of course, at each of these stages, defilements are eradicated. For example, the Sotapanna Magga stage, wrong view, doubt, jealousy, avarice, certain levels of greed, anger, and delusion eliminated by this first path consciousness. Another way to understand is that perception of permanence, perception of self. This is another example of the types of perceptions that are eliminated at the first pachitta. So now what we've done is we've kind of understood the defining factors of happiness. We've connected it. And now it's time to kind of analyze and understand how we can maybe incorporate some of these things into our lives. Here we have a roadmap to happiness. If we engage in unwholesome thoughts, yes, there is pleasure. However, unwise attention increases. And this pleasure is pleasure that's associated in greed-rooted thoughts. Unwise attention can lead to stress. Of course, it will lead to birth in unpleasant destinations, and it can have unpleasant results. So while there is a type of pleasure that's there, later on, as time passes by, we will have to encounter unpleasant results. On the other side, we have the practice of wholesome thoughts, or virtue, or concentration and insight. And if we continue, we can even realize Nibbana. And if we don't, still our pleasure or equanimity becomes stronger and stronger. Wholesome thoughts increase, wise attention increases, it leads to birth in pleasant destinations, and of course, pleasant results. So we have this roadmap to happiness that we can gather from the Dhamma. We can understand that we can use it wisely to hopefully increase our levels of happiness. Again, there are varying levels of happiness and types of happiness we've discussed. Of course, all of you can't decide to become a monk and wear a robe like me, but it doesn't mean that we cannot incorporate some of these things into our lives and increase our levels of happiness. We can develop virtue, sometimes wise attention, wholesome thoughts that include generosity, patience, so on and so forth. And this will help increase our happiness. And of course, if you have more time, you have more effort, then you can incorporate meditation into your life. and increase your happiness through that. Now, this Venerable went through a discourse about Buddhism and happiness, but the Buddha talks about suffering a lot. So there's a question here. If there is happiness, why did the Buddha say that the 5 aggregates are suffering? I'm sure all of you, or many of you, have this question on your mind. Well, the mind is always impermanent. All types of happiness associated with the mind don't last. The minds continuously perish. Therefore, they are suffering. It's the reason, actually, or one of the reasons, that at the beginning of our conversation or discussion, your mind darted around looking for happiness. Because happiness continues to be temporary. However, we still do have a permanent type of happiness, which is called nibbana, peace. So while the Buddha taught the path towards the cessation of suffering, he also, of course, recognized happiness. He recognized pleasant feeling. He understood it. And he incorporated it so that we can still experience happiness while we practice the Dhamma towards Nibbana. Again, another question. If this happiness we discussed ends in suffering, why should we try to attain it? Well, if we practice the Dhamma correctly, some of the byproducts are happiness and peace. And of course, it's better than having grief or sadness in our lives. Finally, is it correct to assume that we can be happy while we practice towards achieving the permanent peace of Nibbana? Yes, the path to Nibbana is blissful, and the ultimate goal of Nibbana is also blissful. I think it's actually quite wonderful. I'm seated here in Sri Lanka, and I have all these people joining from different parts of the world, especially London. And we're all here on a collective basis to understand the Dhamma. I think it's important to understand there are so many things going on in the world, but we can still join together, talk about peace and happiness. And this is one of the wonderful things about the Buddha's teachings. It provides present happiness. He teaches future happiness. And he also teaches the permanent bliss of Nibbana. So I hope that each and every one of you can use this information and slowly travel this path and gain higher and higher levels of happiness until you one day attain Nibbana and escape all suffering. Thank you.
Bhante, thank you very much. And I hope that you can relax, but that was really a very wonderful talk. I'm sure that there are people out there who'd like to raise a question or two, and I hope you'll be able to answer them, please. Bhante, if I could just ask you a question whilst we're waiting for others to join us. So the interesting thing about your own personal journey in Buddhism, Bhante, was that many monks who ordain as Buddhist monks start off, especially from Sri Lanka, at a very young age. And in your case, you waited until I think your early middle age, perhaps, to leave a lay life as a successful investment banker in America, and approach Buddhism as an ordained person. So one can only presume that that was quite a life-changing experience, a life-changing decision that you chose to make. And was it really to do with happiness that made you to make that change?
Yeah, so thank you, Amar, for the question. I think, to be honest, I had a very wonderful life. I was lucky. I had a good education in Sri Lanka. I had a good education in the US, and I was blessed with some of these things. And of course, working on Wall Street, of course, gave me a lot of happiness in the greed-rooted side. I pursued all types of happiness. Actually, it was something, I guess you might even call it my hobby. But from another side, what I began to realize was that this type of happiness that I was pursuing, or was looking for, wasn't very peaceful. It wasn't very stable. And it wasn't very enriching, actually. I needed something more meaningful in my life, because I came to a point where, I mean, I could live the rest of my life like this, but what would be the point of it? So at that time, of course, a bunch of ideas went through my mind. And one of them was to try out the Dhamma, test it, and see whether there's something here that could give me happiness. I mean, if you look at our Buddha, the prince, before he became Buddha, when he was Bodhisattva, he was Prince Siddhartha, and he had a lot of happiness, he had 3 palaces, he had many people to serve him. I mean, he was a prince, a king, and of course, it's a lot different than being a king now. There was a lot more leeway for him to enjoy all the pleasures he had, but he still chose this path. Of course, I'm not comparing myself, but I believe that if such a person could choose such a path, there must be something here for me to follow, for me to look for too. So I started this journey, and actually, it's amazingly blissful. It's amazingly happy. It's difficult. At the beginning, it's very difficult. And not eating food, or not taking money, not touching money, not listening to music. Of course, all these things are things you have to adjust to. But it's something that goes hand in hand. You from one side, you begin to adjust, and from another side, because you adjust, you begin to experience these new levels of happiness that the Buddha taught. So, but yeah, I hope that answers your question.
I would like to invite Navam, who's joined us, please, on the Zoom call. Navam, please go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you very much, and also thank you, Bhante, for an amazing discourse that I really enjoyed. I had a clarification question to ask you on the topic of wise attention, and you talked about the arresting bhavanga, and then the immediate sort of wise attention thought that arises before the wholesome minds that happen after. Is that wise attention thought a conscious decision that you make intentionally, or is that something that happens unconsciously because these are very, very short periods of time? And how do you consciously make that distinction, if it is a conscious?
Well, that's a wonderful question, actually. I think this is something a lot of people think about and wonder. So first of all, when we look at the Dhamma, we have to understand that all of the 5 aggregates are causes and effects. So even though we think that there's a being, even though we think that there's a person, actually, it's a bunch of causes and effects that give us these types of results. So, for example, let's take a person who has wise attention. How did he get this wise attention? Sometimes he would listen to the Dhamma, and because of the knowledge that arises by listening, he inclines the mind to make decisions that are in accordance with the Dhamma. This decision-making process of these thoughts can help that single wise attention to arise. That's one way. Then he might practice virtue. If he practices virtue again, the practice of virtue can help that wise decision arise again. Then, of course, if he practices meditation, again, because of the wholesome thoughts that arise, that wise attention can arise. So throughout the Dhamma, we have all these causes that in the end start giving this wise attention the conditions to arise. So then someone might wonder, well, how about, for example, I'm walking down the street, I see someone who is hungry and I should give him some food. How does this decision actually help wise attention? It actually does, because what happens is now he's having these thoughts of generosity, thoughts of looking after someone, thoughts of compassion. These thoughts purify the mind and then can result in this wise decision arising in a later thought. So in this way, even though we might think it's momentary, and it is momentary, actually, it is, but the thinking patterns we have will help that wise attention arise. However, I do want to specify one more thing, and that is like the Buddha taught the way for this wise attention to increase, actually. He taught the way. He taught us about paramis, which are generosity, virtue, renunciation, truth, wisdom, equanimity, so on and so forth, determination. Then he also taught us about virtue, meditation of concentration, meditation of insight. So when we practice this way, the conditions for future wise attention to arise are much, much stronger. It's one of the reasons why a person who practices Dhamma can have this wise attention much, much easier. And they can also understand how it arises in the mind. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much, Bhante.
We have a question in the audience here in London Buddhist Vihara. If I can just prepare that. Hi, Graham, if you could please ask Bhante a question.
Yes, Bhante, thank you very much indeed for your engaging talk. Just one thought. When we talk about happiness, to desire happiness, that could be interpreted as sounding a little bit selfish, perhaps, in a way. We can desire happiness for others, but desiring it for ourselves, how is that? And I suppose when we think also of the descriptions of higher meditative states, we notice that those factors which can seem like happiness, joy and bliss, sort of fade away. So is happiness a sort of intermediate destination rather than a final one?
Right. So there are a couple of questions there. I think, first of all, let's talk about the desire for happiness. The desire for happiness, first of all, we have to understand how we define desire. Desire can be desire without greed. If there's desire without greed, then you can avoid the selfish side. That's just one thing. But let's just try to dig in a little bit more and understand more about the happiness, what we call desire for happiness. For example, let's say I want to be happy, and I think it's actually selfish. But what happens is when a person actually begins to generate the correct type of happiness, the happiness based on wholesome thoughts, what happens is actually his selfishness begins to reduce. He actually begins to care more about others. There's more compassion, and there's more happiness when other people are happy. There's also more mudita or altruistic joy. So all these things actually happen. If you try to get that correct type of happiness, then it actually doesn't contain the selfish side. So I guess that's one type of thing to understand. Of course, if you go after the greed-rooted happiness, then there's a lot of selfishness, because you destroy anybody or anything to achieve that type of happiness. So I hope that gives you some clarity on that. And then the second question was about the jhanas and about the higher bliss and the joy. Yes, so what happens is, yes, this joy or this bliss doesn't last. It lasts a mind moment. It only lasts a mind moment. The thing with jhanas is that differ it from other thoughts is that there can be millions of jhanas continuously arising and perishing. While if you take a normal mind process, it's only 7 jhanas or 7 mind thoughts before it goes back into either registration consciousness or Balanga. So there's this one side of the jhana that there can be many, many thoughts, and it's very, very blissful. Now, what happens is there are 2 things that can happen. Of course, the person can be stuck in the jhana and can think, okay, this is it. This is what I want in my life. Just be happy with jhanas for the rest of my life, and I'll be content. Now, this is not what the Buddha taught. What the Buddha taught was you can use this jhana or the access concentration of the jhana to start vipassana, to discern mentality and materiality. Actually, one of the ways to start vipassana for what we call a person who practices serenity is to start discerning the mental factors of the jhana. So, for instance, if it's first jhana, then they will start discerning vitakka, which is initial application, vichara, sustained application, so on and so forth. So, piti, sukha, ekagata. So, when he starts doing that, his knowledge begins to increase, and he can discern the other mental factors and start doing materiality as well. So, if we decide to stop at the jhanas, well, then we're actually kind of being stuck in the sense of our journey towards nibbana. But of course, if we have the Buddha's teaching in a time like this, we have enough information to understand that we're not going to, that's not our goal. Our goal is to use that concentration to discern mentality and materiality, causes and effects, and proceed ahead. And I think there's one other thing I want to point out here. This is a question I found out a lot, is that we shouldn't be afraid of concentration. It's not something where we're going to be so attached to it that we will not be able to escape. If we have the right knowledge and we have the right way to use that concentration, then we don't have to worry about it. Is that okay? Was that answer your question?
Andy, thank you very much indeed. And the reference to the Brahma Viharas, I think, was really, really apt. Thank you.
Okay.
Bhante, if I could just ask you sort of a fairly complex question regarding the world today and the state of things. So obviously, you must be knowing that the world is in a fairly precarious situation, as we see it from the news alerts that we all receive. There are increasing conflicts and effectively two wars, major wars that are happening in the world right now, and these may spill over into bigger confrontations. And it's also obviously a time when we have to reflect on the fact that there's a lot of unhappiness that these wars are generating, not only for the people where they're happening, these events are happening, but also beyond those shores. So I can understand that the description of your talk today is really about a personal journey that people need to take. But from a wider context, and for those people who are at great anxiety and pain in many cases, what solace can they get from their predicament, from the teachings of the Buddha, and indeed the advice you're giving in terms of the search for happiness today, please?
Very, very complex and difficult question, but a wonderful question. I think the Buddha's teachings are something that at the end we have to practice to get the best results. Now, if you're in the middle of a war, in a place, of course, these days, sometimes it's difficult to practice. You don't have the thought of practice. I mean, you're worried about whether your mother is going to be alive, your family is going to be alive, or worry about food for the day or water for the day. So it's actually a very stressful situation. And I mean, how do you overcome this through the Dhamma? I mean, it's very, very difficult. I think what you can do is you can try to practice a certain type of patience that ensures your survival as well. Because I think what happens in these types of situations is that a person is actually stressed and put in a position so much that they don't have thoughts or to be able to understand how things actually can develop or unfold, or they can, I don't think they even have the choices. So it's actually a very difficult thing to do. We have to just accept that it's a very difficult thing to do. But does that mean we give up? No, I don't think we give up. As humans, that's one of the finer qualities we have. We don't give up. What we do is we try to adjust our environment. We try to engage in people who maybe have similar thoughts, similar feelings. I mean, and hopefully try to gain a type of protection, a type of stress first. I think one thing that this situation, this question reminds me of is when the Bodhisattva actually decides to come to the world to become a Buddha. When the Bodhisattva decides to become a Buddha, he looks at the world, and if the lifespan, I think it's below 100, at that time, if it's below 100, then he doesn't choose to come, and the lifespan is because the lifespan becomes lower and lower, and people actually cannot understand the Dhamma because they're suffering so much. So that's one instance where the Bodhisattva doesn't come, and then the other time is when the lifespan is very, very long. At the time when it's very, very long, people live such a pleasant life that they don't understand the noble truth of suffering. They can't relate to it. So I think when you put somebody in a position of war, how do they reach happiness? I think in the little things, in the things that they can actually relate to on a daily basis. And these little things can be, looking after your children, looking after your mother, your father, things is sharing compassion. I mean, at the end of the day, we have to always remember Buddha taught hatred will never solve hatred. It never can, because the mind, the hateful mind, actually harms itself first. The hateful mind harms itself first. And something that we have to kind of navigate. I cannot give you a direct answer to this question because, to be honest, it's a very difficult question, and I'm not in a position to understand or relate to the types of suffering these people are going through. It's just too much. I hope that gives you a partial answer.
Yes, thank you, Bhante. I have a follow-up question. If I could just ask probably our last question today. So it relates to, I think you mentioned a child and how a child experiences happiness, and the question that you raised right at the beginning. But in the contemporary world that we all live in, especially in the West, we're sort of fed a diet that happiness derives from materialism, whether it's, studying to get a better job, striving to earn more money, providing more for your family, whether it's your wife and your children, and also, buying a better house, moving on to be more successful, earning money, being more materially successful, shall we say? Okay. So how do we deal with this sort of conflict that we experience in day-to-day life all the time? The need to provide good resources, whatever we want to call it, to our family, make sure that they're well cared for, and the search that you're contemplating, for mental, personal, spiritual advancement.
Sure. Yeah, I think, again, I guess the question is, or the question we can ask ourselves is, can we obtain these resources? Can we obtain these material goods and still protect our mind? I think that's the question we have to understand or answer. Can we go through all of this and still protect our mind? And I think it's very, very possible. I think just in my own experience of some of the meditators that I have in the West, they're doing high intense jobs, very busy, but they still integrate meditation into their lives. They still incorporate virtue into their lives, and they still have success. I think one of the things, one of the misunderstandings I have seen in general is that people believe that greed is necessary to be successful. If you have greed, that's the only way you can be successful. Now, greed is a thought that, makes you chase something, maybe, but do you only chase by greed? No, you can chase something by wisdom. You can chase something by faith. You can chase something by understanding your surroundings and thinking this is the most suitable way. You don't always have to be greedy to achieve material success. Then another side of how people are driven these days, and I've seen this especially because of social media and the things, the implications of that is people are also driven by fear. They're driven by fear. They're afraid to be judged wrongly, so they adjust to accommodate the culture, accommodate society. They're afraid that their closest friends are doing something very cool and they're not, and they will be left behind, so they try to catch up. So what society has done right now, or what exists in society, we have two defining factors. One is the fear, and another is greed. Now, the question would be, are these the only two factors that will give us success? I don't think so, because they both harm the person on the way there. They harm the person on the way to that destination. And this side I've seen, very, very powerful. Actually, to be honest, I was working at Lehman Brothers when it went bankrupt in 2008. I was there during the bankruptcy. And I saw a lot of people sad and a lot of people upset, and I felt that. But I also understood that a lot of it was, they were still very, very successful compared to the rest of the US. But of course, they went through this tough time, and there was this period of sadness, and still they had this sadness. But it was because they couldn't understand, the conditions around them. But they could still choose to be happy. So you can go through all this stress, but you can still choose to be happy. And that's where the Buddha's teachings become very, very important. Because at the end, we have to understand that our mind defines how we perceive the world. And if you have the space, if you have the ability, then you can do that to your mind, develop it, and still provide for your family, provide for your loved ones, without the greed and without the fear.
Well, Venerable Seeladassana would like to ask a question.
Venerable, here we know in Buddhism, suffering can be overcome by transforming our mind or transcending. Both ways are traced in Buddhist meditation. We can transform our mind through the meditation, and also we can transcend our mind for ultimate happiness. So in the West, a lot of people practice mindfulness for two reasons, especially as stress reduction. They practice mindfulness, and as cognitive therapy, they practice mindfulness. You has said that wise consideration, a couple of times you highlighted that wise consideration is useful to overcome this, to guide us to wholesome state. So I have the question, means how wise consideration, yoniso manasikara, help in worldly sense to transform our mind, to overcome our stress, overcome our suffering. Would you please give any definition about wise consideration or yoniso manasikara, or any area of the wise consideration? Thank you.
Sorry, Amal, could you just help me for 1 second? I couldn't. It wasn't a little bit clear.
Yes. Okay.
I'm sorry,
Okay.
Venerable Bhante. I couldn't understand the question. If you could just repeat it.
Sure. Let me just come here. So I think Venerable Seeladassana would like. I think you mentioned wise consideration in your presentation, and I think he wanted a more sort of actual examples of how wise consideration can impact on the pursuit of happiness. Is that?
Yes,
to transform the mind. How wise consideration can really beneficially transform the mind.
Transfer the mind.
Transform. Improve the mind.
Okay, understand.
Yeah.
So yes, Bhante, with your permission, Venerable Sir. So let's take an example of wise attention, and let's see how it evolves. For example, and I think the Venerable Bhante also talked about meditation. So let's say a person is practicing meditation, and because he's practicing meditation, wise attention begins to increase. So what ends up happening is the way he perceives, and there are many angles we can look at, but one of the angles we're going to look at is the way he perceives objects, for instance, begins to change because of the wise attention. So for instance, if he looks at an object like a bird or a flower, or if he hears something, he might have the wise attention to understand that it is impermanent, or he might have the wise attention to understand that it is suffering. So when this happens, what happens is the wholesome thoughts that arise may have pleasant feeling, may not have pleasant feeling, but they'll have wholesome thoughts that enrich the mind, make it stronger. And what it does is it actually begins to act as conditions for other wholesome thoughts that arise later. So that's one way. Another way is when we have wise attention is a cause for wise attention. So what happens is the mind continuously inclines towards wise attention, inclines towards perceiving objects in a better and better way, or in a deeper and deeper way. So again, what happens is that wise attention prevents the mind from falling towards unwholesome thoughts. Let's say, for example, we see something very, very unpleasant that'll make us maybe angry. But when we have wise attention, the mind inclines not to the unwholesome side. It inclines to the wholesome side. So by inclining to the wholesome side, we actually prevent stress, we prevent grief, and these types of unwholesome thoughts don't arise. So I think that's one of the important features of wise attention. What it does is it actually keeps guiding the person towards wholesome thoughts. I think I just remembered an example actually. One of the students, or one of the students who studies under me, when their meditation was increasing, they began to ask me a question. Bhante, I'm walking down the street, and sometimes I just go into concentration while I'm walking for a brief moment. Now, is that normal? Why is that happening? And I said, or he was in a vehicle, and I said, well, what was happening in the vehicle? And I was talking to this person, and the conversation wasn't very interesting. It was boring. Then I said, so did you not like it? Yeah, it was a little bit defiling to my mind. So what happened was, in his case, his mind began to understand that there was unwholesome conversation going place, so it inclined to concentration. And this happens at a very subtle level, especially if you can understand causes and effects. Then you can understand that when the mind becomes wiser and wiser, it'll avoid these types of events of unwholesome behavior and so on and so forth. So again, of course, this person at that time had wise attention. So the wise attention will protect the mind from going towards stress. And as Venerable Bhante mentioned, it will also transform the mind to make those wholesome thoughts stronger and stronger, and enrich them with wisdom, so on and so forth. With your permission.
We have a question in the Zoom audience. So if I could ask Sanjana to kindly ask his question, and I'll try and get you on the screen, Sanjana. Just give me a second.
Thank you, Amal. Venerable Bhante, in your presentation, you mentioned stress. Now, in the West, mental health is a big topic, which is addressed by psychologists. So how does that compare to what you mentioned?
Yeah, so I think we have to understand psychology and Buddhism a little bit to get some clarity. When the Buddha taught the mind, he actually taught us directly about the mind. Directly, what are the constituents of the mind, how the mind arises, how it perishes, and he taught us how to be able to discern this mind. So it's actually direct dealing with the mind. Again, I'm not a psychologist, so I don't want to act like I know the field of psychology, but I do have some friends who are psychologists, and I think from my interactions, what I understand is in psychology, we actually follow behavioral patterns. We ask questions, and we understand how they think, how they behave towards certain things, how they react, how they kind of understand certain situations or events. So there's a little bit of distance between directly knowing the mind and asking questions and trying to understand the behavior. So I think that distance is something which we have to understand. One of the examples that I can give is, for instance, one of the people I know who meditates, they had a problem where their meditation wasn't actually developing. It was a little bit stuck. Now, this person on the outside looks, quite wonderful, no problems whatsoever, look very happy. But when they were meditating, they got stuck. And one of the reasons we found out was because of an event that took place about 20 years before that. So 20 years ago, this event took place, and it created some stress in her mind, and therefore her meditation couldn't develop any further until she addressed this stress, until she confronted it, or until she discerned it and understood its reality. So now that means 20 years she didn't visit a psychologist, and I don't think she didn't meditate. She didn't even know she had this type of stress. So that gap between knowing the mind directly and then discussing and trying to understand the mind, there's that gap. And sometimes I think people go throughout their whole lives carrying stress and not even knowing that they have stress. So that distance is there.
Thank you.
We have a question, though, from Aruna. If I could ask Aruna to please ask her question to Bhante.
Thank you so much, Bhante. for your informative information we are given. I would like to ask you maybe a couple of questions. One of them is related to something you mentioned, that the world is driven by stress and anxiety. Can you give us some maybe tips how we can manage the anxiety according to Buddhism? And my second question is, when we try to do the meditation practice, sometimes it's really, really hard to maintain the continuity. So it's like we lose some kind of maybe weary, like encouragement to continue. Can you give us some maybe a few tips as laypersons? How can we practice this in our life, lay life place? Thank you so much.
I'm sorry, could you, the first question, if I couldn't hear clearly, I'm sorry.
Yeah, the first question is, can you give us some tips how we can manage the anxiety? Because you said the world is driven by the greed and anxiety. So, yes. Yeah, thank you so much.
I think one of the things we can understand when we look at history, of mankind, and we look at human behavior over the hundreds or 200s or 300s of years, is that we always adapt, we always adjust. And that's one of the features that humans have. And at that time, we have resources to adjust. I think the first thing we have to understand is we have to accept that we have to adjust. We have to accept that we have to change. I think as Sanjana also mentioned about mental health or mental wellness, this topic is beginning to become more and more pronounced in society. So I think we are starting those steps to understanding that this is something we need to address, something very, very important. And so I think that's the beginning. But we cannot stop there. We have to understand that how are we going to address this? Of course, we have to be more compassionate. We have to be more kind. We have to be more patient. We have to understand the benefits of these activities. We have to understand the disadvantages of instilling anger or instilling fear or instilling greed. So it really, really boils down to individuals. And of course, we can have leaders of society help guide these individuals, help them move towards these types of patterns. But what is society? What is the world? It's individuals. Individuals make up society. Individuals make up the world. So each of us have a responsibility to try to change society. I think it was Margaret Mead who once said, never doubt small groups' ability to change the world, because it's only a small group that actually ever has changed the world. So yeah, I think it's very, very important that we begin to become responsible and we begin to spread this type of information and knowledge, because if we don't, I think we might end up in a direction that's not very, very good or very stable for mankind. But I think humans adjust. So at least the next 50, 100 years, I think we'll come up with a plan to do so. With respect to meditation, I think your question was about tips for meditation. I think one of the most important tips is if you look at the Buddha's teachings, the Buddha said find a good teacher. Buddha said find a good teacher. So I think having a good teacher is very, very important for meditation. I think there are many experiences that happen through meditation that we sometimes don't understand. Sometimes people might have concentration and they don't know they have concentration. Sometimes people might not have concentration but believe they have concentration. So I think we have to kind of educate ourselves a little bit. And I think that's one of the tips. If I don't know a person, I would advise. Of course, if I knew you better, if we discussed more, then I could understand you more and understand how you think or how you meditate, so on and so forth, and give you more specific answer. But with respect to a general answer, I think we have to understand. I've been meditating, I think it's been more than a decade, about 13 years now. And I think one of the things I learned is that we can't assume we know until we actually know. it's kind of a cyclical answer. But the thing is, we have to go back to the Buddha's teachings and try to match or understand our experiences related to that. Remember, the Buddha was the master of the mind. He was the master, and he described everything in very, very high detail. And I think we have to appreciate that and have that faith. So what happens is we can use that to guide us. I think the mind is a very complex instrument. It's a very subtle instrument. It's very fast. So to navigate, we need information. So I think one of the best types of tips I could give is to start learning about the meditation. If you haven't, if you have, of course, then I think you'll be okay. But if you haven't, maybe read a little bit more, or the Tripitaka or commentary, sub-commentary, this type of books, and I think it'll help guide you, because that's why the Buddha came to this world. Actually, he came to this world, he arose in this world to remove our suffering, to help us remove our suffering. So if we have this big resource still available in terms of the Dhamma, then we should use it. We should definitely use it. And I hope that's okay.
Thank you, Bhante. I think we're just going to wrap up here. I'm sure it's very late for you right now. So let me just thank you officially, and then we'll close the meeting very shortly. Well, first of all, I'd like to thanks many people who have made this event happen today. It's not easy to arrange these kinds of events, and a lot of people have come together to put this together. There has been, first of all, I'd like to thank Venerable Seeladassana personally. It's been quite a challenge, but we've got there in the end. Just to say that Venerable Seeladassana is in a very remote part of Sri Lanka, and he very generously offered to not only take part and deliver this talk today, but also overcome, I think this is the first time he's ever been on Zoom. So, so we had to overcome a lot of challenges technically, and I'd like to also thank Sanjana, his friend and colleague, and so we had to reach out to Melbourne in Australia to get some of the technical expertise to make this happen. But I'm really glad that everything from a technical perspective has worked well today, and I think everyone around the world has heard and seen Bhante give his talk and answer the questions. So that's the first thing. There's also been a lot of things that have made this event happen at London Buddhist Vihara, and I need to thank the head monk, Venerable Seeladassana, for graciously allowing us to have these talks at London Buddhist Vihara for the British MahaBodhi Society. There's also the various helpers that I have, that the MahaBodhi Society have here, who help put these events on. And I need to thank the people who do the catering, arrange the hall, set up all the technical equipment that make this all happen. And also thank everyone, every single one of you who come and attended this event, either in the hall personally or around the world. I mean, I know there's a lot of competing things like a Cricket World Cup and a Rugby World Cup happening, and even train strikes that have made it difficult to come here. So I really appreciate the fact that you've all made the effort to come. But actually, obviously, most of all, I'd like to thank Venerable Seeladassana so much for this illuminating talk, and I hope that we can collaborate, the British MahaBodhi Society can collaborate with you on a continuing basis, Bhante, because I think it's been a very enlightening your talk and the presentation. There will be an opportunity to rewatch this for those people who couldn't stay for the whole duration of the talk, and it will be eventually posted on YouTube, and I will share that YouTube with you, Bhante, so you can use it on your platforms to share amongst your friends and colleagues. just in terms of future events of the British MahaBodhi Society, we are planning now for events in the new year. In November, we will be doing a collaboration with the MahaBodhi Society of India, who is hosting a conference, their annual conference from Sana, and it will be an online conference on Buddhist jurisprudence. And there will be academics from all over the world participating in that, and we will be streaming that and sharing parts of that with our audience. In December, our plan is to have Dr. Sarah Shaw attend the London Buddhist Vihara to give a lecture, and we very much look forward to that. And then moving forward, there are lots of plans for us to have events to continue our series through the British MahaBodhi Society. So you will be kept informed via email and other platforms. We will also be launching things like our Facebook channel has just been launched, and we will be launching a Twitter or X platform, as well as probably Instagram in the near future. And there's obviously our YouTube channel as well. In closing, I'd like to thank the trustees of the Anagarika Dhammapala Trust, who have very graciously reinvigorated the British MahaBodhi Society, in particular Sudhammika Hevritana, Singha Ratnatunga, and Rajiv Hevritana. And I'd like to thank my co-colleagues here in London at the British MahaBodhi Society, Dr. Nihal Veerasena and Sudanta Abekun in supporting the events that we're putting together this year. So thank you very much for joining us, and hope to see you soon. Thank you.